Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought we're going to do something a little bit, not weird, but I know this series Cunk on Britain. It's by a British comedian, I don't know her name. Philomena Cunk, but I mean I don't know, that's just her stage name or whatever you want to call it, right? And she has done this series on history. This is from a YouTube channel, I don't know, and I don't know if they own the rights to this, I don't know. But I'll leave this video down below. Alright, let's just see what this is. Because this is sort of, I think, history with comedy, right? Sort of like an oversimplified, but it's with British humor, right? So it's gonna be a lot of sarcasm. And a lot of, I think, dry humor for most.
Today, Britain stands at a fork in its crossroads, and its people are asking questions. Now we've got our country back. What actually is it? Who are we, and why?
I think this is like Brexit she's talking about.
The best way to find out where Britain's heading is to look behind us into something called history, a sort of rear-view mirror for time. So that's where I'm going, back there.
It's a journey.
Oh, one thing though. History isn't just a rear view mirror on time, because history, as we are taught and learns about and talk about, is written history. That's history, right? So I don't know. Sure, you can say it that way, but history is most of the time is written history, right?
Journey that'll take me the length and width of the country, from the White Cliffs of Dover to the Scottish Highlands of the Scottish Highlands.
Yeah.
From old stone circles to modern stone circles.
Yep.
From the tranquil beauty of Roman Bath
to the golden wonder of Oxford services.
Wow.
I'll discover how we went from ancient man to Ed Sheeran.
Yeah.
Why Elizabeth I happened, and solving the mystery of just who Winston Churchill was, and why he wound up helplessly trapped inside this banknote.
Right.
Along the way, I'll be shouting at helicopters
and looking at some of the biggest events in British history and asking people about them. In War II, why did the British build bombers to attack their own territory?
What?
How do you mean?
Well, the Lancaster bombers.
Ah.
And also,
one thing about this is also she does interviews with experts, right? And historical people and whatnot, right? People who know a lot about history or some specialty into history. And also this is 20th century shocks. So I think this is from World War One. And I think to the end of World War Two, I think.
Walking somewhere impressive with my mouth shut, while my voice speaks anyway, like I'm talking aloud in my own head. All of it taking place in this sceptred isle we call home. So join me, Philomena Cunk, as I take you right up the history of the United Britain of Great Kingdom.
Nice.
It's Cunk on Britain.
Nowadays, first world is something you put in front of the word problem.
Yep.
To show that it isn't really that bad. Like running out of couscous or not being able to check Twitter in the tunnel. But back then, first world was what they called the war.
Yeah.
The First World War had loads of nicknames.
Although, again, you can argue, is it really the First World War? Meaning the first one to happen? Because, I mean, the 7 Years' War, you can argue that was a world war. They fought in Europe, they fought in Africa, they fought in the Pacific, they fought in Americas, they fought in Asia, particularly in India. Right, the French and the British. You can argue that. I mean, there's other wars you can also argue. Technical world wars, right?
The War to End All Wars,
Yep.
the Great War,
Yep.
and of course, World War I. Why did they call it World War I?
Although they didn't call it, I don't know if they at the time they called it World War One. they called it the Great War and the War to End All Wars as a nickname. The Great War makes sense because it was massive in scale, right? Casualties, the equipment used, right? The physical scale where you were battling, right? Maybe it was the Americans that called it the First World War or something. I don't know.
World War One. It's quite pessimistic numbering, isn't it?
That's
Or
fair.
did they just know it was the start of a franchise?
Wow.
At the time, they weren't numbering the wars.
Okay.
I think that in the First World War, the idea of it being a great war, denoting the sheer scale of the conflict.
Like I said, yep.
The casualty rate was already becoming used quite a lot.
So it was called the Great War, but not because it was great. The
Nice.
First World
Nice.
War was started by the killing of one man, Franz Ferdinand.
Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, died also. But okay.
Never heard of him, or the band named after
Or the
him.
band, yeah.
But he was dead important, by which I mean he was only important when he was dead. His assassination...
I mean, that's not true, but okay.
Killings. Soon it caught on, and everyone wanted to be killed.
Yeah.
It was a bigger craze than fidget spinners.
Eventually, Britain got
That's
sucked
true,
into
I guess.
fighting, and men queued up to have their flat caps converted into fighting men's helmets. Soon, hundreds of thousands of Tommies were heading for battle.
Yep.
Why were all the British soldiers in World War I called Tommy? Was that just a coincidence?
No, it wasn't a coincidence. It's just a general name that
Coincidence.
became applied to British soldiers in the same way we talk of Fritz as being a generic name for
Yep.
German soldiers.
What happened in Normandy?
But I mean, he didn't explain why. He just said it's just a common name that they said because of why. He didn't say the reason why they called him the Tommy and they called him Fritz. He didn't say the reason. I don't know the reason,
were only
but
people
you know.
that were called Norman allowed in there?
Well, it's not Norman's land. This is no man's
Yeah,
land.
yeah.
And the idea being that this is particularly dangerous territory between the lines of the Germans on one side and the British on the other. This is essentially just a killing zone, a very dangerous zone in between trench systems.
That's
Why
true.
did they fire shells at each other? Because shells wouldn't really hurt, would they?
Oh.
Unless they were those razor clam shells, because they're quite sharp, aren't they?
She means seashells.
Well, these weren't
Nice.
seashells.
Yeah.
These were heavy pieces of ordnance.
Yep.
We're actually talking about bits of metal in brass casing. So that's where the name shells comes from.
All right. Looking at footage from the time, it's hard to get a grip on just how brutal it must have been for Tommy and Norman.
For Tommy and Norman. Yeah, I mean, that's true. But I mean, you see her being in the movie theater here and looking at what's supposedly being World War One footage, right? Because you see the tanks, you see the men having those sets of uniforms and equipment with them and running over no man's land. You could ask yourself, how could they film that and the film crew not dying? Because a lot of footage from World War One that we see are reenactments after the war by veterans of World War One, right? But it's reenactments, right? There are some real footage, right? Like what's it called? At the Somme, they exploded mines, and you can search one on YouTube, I think. One of those mines being exploded. So like you type in World War One Somme mine explosion or something. I don't remember what the place is called. No, I don't remember, but you can search that up. And the reason why you see on the footage here, the tanks and the men are sort of, it looks like they're ants, but it also looks like they're very fast, right? Looks like it's being sped up. The reason is because when you were filming at the time, you had to use your hand to crank the frame rate, right? The amount of pictures per second, right? So the faster you crank, the faster the footage is. The slower you crank, the slower the footage was, right? And I mean, obviously these are reenactments, But particularly at war, I mean, you would crank faster than usual because you would be afraid to be shot, right? But okay.
Because it's in black and white and everyone's moving too fast, probably to avoid the shells.
Yeah, sure.
Even though it looks a bit like Charlie Chaplin, it's actually not funny at all.
Wow.
So you can't laugh, just like with Charlie Chaplin.
Wow. What?
One man who vividly captured
What? When I was little, I watched Charlie Chaplin. What? Why is she going at Charlie Chaplin like that? What?
sheer horror of War One was the poet Wilfred Owen.
Oh yeah. One thing about World War One, which separates... one thing that separates World War One with World War Two, apart from everything else, is for some reason there was a lot of poetry. Maybe because of the place where the men were fighting, specifically on the Western Front. There was some on the Eastern Front, but specifically on the Western Front because there was just trench systems from the English Channel down to Switzerland's border, right? So people were just stuck there and they became poets, right? Let's hear this one.
If, in some smothering dreams, you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues.
You get the gist.
My friend.
You get the gist. I mean, you hear those words, it's describing... I don't know if the poet Wilfred Owen saw that. Maybe he did, but doesn't matter if he saw it or not. You can just see it in front of you even though you're not there. You can smell it almost, right? In the trenches. Dead bodies all around you, rats, disease, shells being fired all the time. Wow.
As if the killing wasn't bad enough, the accommodation was scarcely worth 2 stars on TripAdvisor.
Only?
Soldiers had to live in trenches, snaking cramped corridors of filth and squalor, without so much as a patio. The World War I trenches weren't the right place for conventional warfare, were they? But why did neither side think about mud wrestling? Because they're the perfect conditions, aren't they?
That's true.
Well, I mean, trench warfare wasn't new. I think
That's also true.
You'll get the occasional game of Christmas football. I don't think that anyone actually ever thought that letting the guns fall silent and having mud wrestling competitions was ever going to sort anything out.
I mean, that's true, and yeah, that's true, but the Christmas truce, it didn't happen everywhere. It was sort of a local thing up to the men that chose to do it. The higher officers and commanders didn't like that. It was just the fighting men who did it on their own accords, right? So that was amazing. But the trenches, yes, trenches are very old, but not on this scale. Not a single line. It's sort of like you have a new border, right? The World War I trenches on the Western Front is sort of a new border between the Germans and the French, sort of, right? Belgium is almost gone, right? They have a little bit of western part of Belgium left. But you use trenches in siege warfare. You used it also against each other on a battlefield, right? I think the Scottish used trenches against the English during the Independence War. I think. Okay.
You missed a trick, don't you? Eventually the war ended at 11 o'clock on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in the year 1119, 1118.
Nice.
Hence the term stopping for 11s. The soldiers came home to a Britain they could hardly recognise because it was wearing a skirt. While the Tommy had been away at the front, women had stepped into their old jobs. There were women milkmen, women postmen, women bus driver men, even women male prostitutes. What's more, the economy was in a pickle. After the war, many industries found it almost impossible to sell their goods abroad. Because abroad was mainly rubble.
That's true.
There were strikes and marches and a Great Depression. Things were shithouse bad.
I mean, the Great Depression obviously didn't start directly after World War I, but I think it laid the groundworks after the First World War. Because the largest economies in the world put everything into World War I, right? And they were so focused on military actions and equipment and everything else. And when you just an instant didn't need any of those equipment and manufacturing capacities for that, then everything just went under, right? Unemployment, everything, right? Because every other businesses had to, at wartime, accommodate for the war, right? So, like, I don't know, fabric manufacturer had to accommodate and get, obviously, bonuses or whatever from the government, but they had to accommodate the war effort, right? So this lays out the groundworks for the Great Depression. I think, again, like in World War I, the sparking of the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and his wife triggered World War I, although it didn't lay the groundworks and then triggered, right? It just triggered. I think the stock market crash triggered the Great Depression, but I think the groundworks were already laid out after World War I. And then maybe the stock market crash triggered, or it showed that the Great Depression was happening, or a depression was happening, and a massive one at that.
But this golden future of television would have to wait.
Uh-oh.
Because back in 1939 times, the
Yep.
TV signals were suddenly switched off because someone decided to start another war to end all wars.
Exactly, another war to end all wars. Poetry.
The leader of Germany, Adolf Hitler, was a funny-looking character with silly hair.
Yep.
A bit like Boris Johnson.
Wow.
But he turned out to be a hateful maniac who would let nothing get in the way of his ambition.
I mean, a lot of leaders in the world at that time were hateful maniacs, right? You had Stalin in the Soviet Union. You had Chiang Kai-shek. He was sort of, on the edge there in China. You had Japan. You had Italy. You had Spain. So there was a lot of this. Again, in the 30s and the late 20s, it laid the groundworks for something to spark. And I think one of the reasons, obviously, is the Great Depression, right? Because people needed not only economic help, but they wanted not ideology, but political change. Because they saw political change meant that economic change would happen, right?
Boris Johnson.
Wow.
Hitler believed the Germans were an elite race.
Actually, Boris Johnson, I think, was born in the US. Funny fact.
The Grand Prix.
He
Wow.
also thought he owned Poland. And when he went round there to get it back, Britain cried war.
This country is at war with Germany.
Luckily, Britain had a hero on its side. A man whose name will never be forgotten. Winston
Yep.
Churchill.
Churchill's
Winston
speeches were
Churchill.
stirring and powerfully erotic.
We know it will be hard. We expect it will be long.
He was one of the greatest orators of all time. And some of the phrases he used still resonate today, such as "find
That's true.
power," "never surrender,"
Yep.
and of course, "we shall fight them bitches."
Okay, I don't think he said that, but okay. I mean, you have to listen to his speech. There's a recording of his speech that he did to Parliament, which is, "We will fight them on the beaches," right? And we will never surrender, right? Of course, that recording is later. I don't know when it was recorded. Maybe it was after the war, right? Maybe in the 50s, or maybe just a year after the war, or 2 years after. I don't know. But it is the speech he gave to Parliament, right? It's the recording is not the speech that he gave to Parliament. It's just a reenactment again of the speech, right? Then there's also a movie about World War II, but more specifically about Winston Churchill, which I think is great.
And we needed Churchill's stirring mumbling, because at first the war didn't go well. Within 6
Yep.
months, France was occupied by the Nazis, who they didn't see coming because they'd been expecting the Germans. Hitler wanted...
Yeah, exactly, that's true, right? But one thing though, I think either Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Yeah, I think he became Prime Minister like 1 or 2 days after the Nazis invaded France and Belgium and Netherlands, right? I think like 2 days, and then he was in, or maybe it was more, but still, like, directly when he was Prime Minister, they invaded, right?
to make Britain German to match its royal family, but the RAF
exactly.
Hitler's forces back in amazing dogfights in the sky that were done by
That's true.
airplanes, not actual flying dogs.
That's also true, right? Not flying dogs, right? Airplanes. And a lot of different nations' soldiers went to fight in the Blitz, right? To help Britain. There was a lot of American pilots. There were a lot of, I think there was some French. There was Polish, maybe Belgium and Dutch, maybe.
Which sadly, science still hasn't invented yet. This was the Battle of Britain.
Yep.
It seems amazing that these young men could fly and fight so well. Although when you look, you'll see the planes had tiny targets and crosses drawn on the side, which made them easier to hit.
But planes
That's
weren't
true.
only
That's
used
how
in
that works.
dogfights. The Germans changed tactics. Instead of attacking planes, which could move out of the way, they attacked the ground, which couldn't, in something called the Blitz.
Yep.
Preceded by a shower of flares, German bombers rained fire and high explosive bombs.
Look at that. I mean, and one thing about the royal family, they stayed. I think they stayed in London during the Blitz, instead of moving, I don't know, to Scotland or something to hide.
Hitler's pilots started dropping bombs.
Sort of aeroplane poos, and people had to hide from them.
Yeah.
They built big tin shelters in their gardens, or ran down
Yep.
the nearest tube station without a ticket or a valid Oyster card. Countless houses
Yep.
were reduced to big piles of bricks and wood, which is sort of what houses are anyway, but in a different order.
Yeah, that's true.
Despite this,
Yep.
thanks to the plucky British spirit, people weren't totally down in the dumps, even if they lived in one.
Yeah, that's true. And also, the spirits are held high by Winston Churchill and the royal family coming out to greet the people who are suffering. And the normal people, day-to-day people, see that, oh, our leaders are here when we're being bombed as well, right? So you have hope.
People sang songs during World War II to keep their
Yep.
spirits up, didn't they? How loud did they have to sing to be heard over the bombs?
Well,
That's
the
interesting.
stations, they would have sometimes been in underground stations, sheltering from the bombs. It would have been loud in the underground station, the singing, if everybody was singing together, but it's true, you wouldn't have been heard much.
I wonder if when they sang, they used to time their singing with the explosions. That would be a fun thing to do.
Wow.
Very difficult to time it. It's quite random, the falling of bombs.
In the war, there were lots of songs taking the piss out of Hitler, weren't there? How come they don't sing those sorts of songs anymore?
Interesting.
Well, he's not around anymore, so it's not so amusing.
Where is he?
Well, he's dead.
He's dead.
Yes.
Oh, right,
Right.
so it'd be disrespectful to
Well, not
speak
so much
ill of him.
disrespectful as pointless, really.
Pointless.
A bit pointless.
Yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
singing was needed.
Fair.
Because even when the Blitz ended, the war was far from over. There were many
Yep.
huge battles to come, most of which will never be forgotten, because they've since been converted into blockbuster movies.
Yeah,
How
yep,
was it we beat
exactly.
the Germans at Dunkirk in War II, but still didn't win the whole war?
What do you mean War 2? What's that? And you didn't beat them at Dunkirk, but okay.
First of all, I think we've got to stop calling it War II. I mean, it's the Second World War if you're American.
Yeah.
And you have to have it this way, it's World War II. But, you know, that's the language we tend to use. But in terms of Dunkirk, I think that's the wrong way round. We actually lose at Dunkirk.
Yeah.
We lost at Dunkirk.
We lost at Dunkirk. I mean,
Don't
it's...
think so. It
I
turns
don't
out
think so.
Dunkirk was a huge disaster. Like most
Yeah.
sequels, War II was proving less fun than War I.
What made the war harder
Yeah.
was that we didn't know what the Germans were planning, because they said
Yep.
it in a sort of code language known as German.
It took a team of British
Yeah,
boffins
exactly.
using a magic typewriter called
Boffins.
the Enigma machine literally loads of time to crack it. But crack it they did.
Yeah. And one thing, sort of the Poles invented the machine, Enigma machine, sort of to crack the German codes, because they were afraid in the midst of the 30s that the Germans were going to do something, right? So they created this. I think it was a lot of Polish mathematicians who created that machine to be able to read the German codes.
And with Germany's secrets twatted wide open, Britain and its allies were able to organise D-Day.
Look like
in
commandos.
months, but in a nice way.
Yeah, exactly.
Exciting scenes like
Oh
these,
my.
expertly
Call of
depicted in the
Duty.
pulse-quickening video game
Yeah.
Call of Duty 2. Soldiers scrambled out of their boats, looking for power-ups and health kits, terrified
If
every
only.
second that a Nazi bullet might kill them, forcing them
Yeah.
to respawn several feet away and be delayed
Right.
by a number of seconds.
If only
Eventually, the British
that was
won,
true.
and immediately there was widespread jubilation and people dancing about in black and white and getting off with
Yep.
people who were almost certainly dead now.
That's
A new,
true.
hopeful era had dawned. An era which 41 years later included the BBC painting and decorating television sitcom Brushstrokes.
Alright, we're gonna end it there because World War II is over. I mean, it was pretty interesting, right? A lot of dry British humor, which I like. And she had those professors and historians that she talked to and asked not stupid question, but question that she kind of twisted to make it fun and to catch, I think, the historians and professors off guard, which she did, which was funny, right? And I think this is a nice way of looking at history, right? All right, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.